Hopefully everybody is hearing me. Welcome so much to tonight's meeting. I think folks are probably still trickling in, but it looks like folks are trickling in, so I'm gonna give it another 30 seconds or so. But as people are trickling into the meeting, I wanted to just quickly introduce myself. I'm Hillary Wilkinson. I'm with Maul, Foster and Alongi. We're a consulting firm that's working with Whatcom County on the public engagement and outreach component of this study that you're going to hear about tonight. And so hopefully you all know that tonight's session is an information sharing session it's an opportunity to share the results of a study regarding the financial feasibility of the potential incorporation of Birch Bay. I am here to facilitate the meeting. There are a lot of people with a lot of interest in this really important issue, and we're really happy that you're all here with us tonight. A lot of work has gone into it, and there's a lot of folks on the line that you're going to be hearing from with a lot of expertise that have been working really hard. I'm a neutral third-party facilitator, which means that my job tonight is to really ensure that everybody has an opportunity, to the degree we can with the time, to share thoughts, ask questions, and have an opportunity to hear from the consultant team about the work that they've done. We are obviously in a remote space, and with that comes little hiccups and issues. And so we just thank you in advance for your patience as we navigate those things. We have a fairly limited amount of time. This meeting is going until about 7 o'clock tonight. And the way that it's structured is we are going to have about a 20-minute presentation followed by 20 to 25 minutes of Q&A. And I'll talk to you a little bit about how the Q&A will work. Before we pivot, I would like to first acknowledge that this meeting is being hosted by Whatcom County. And our contact from Whatcom County is here on the call, Amy Keenan, and she's a special projects coordinator. And I'd like to invite her to do an official welcome from Whatcom County.
Hi, thanks. Again, I'm Amy Keenan, Special Projects with Whatcom County Planning and Development Services. I'd like to first say thank you for all of your interest in this topic, reviewing the materials that have been out there, and for attending this meeting. It's really great to see an engaged community. As many of you know, this study was commissioned by the Whatcom County Council at the request of the Birch Bay Incorporation Association, and it serves as an update to the 2008 feasibility study performed by Burke. PDS was tasked with the administration of the contract for the update, and we selected Community Attributes with Maul Foster as the neutral third-party consultant to perform this update and to do some community outreach. The purpose of this study is to look at updating the assumptions regarding the urban growth boundaries, population growth, the shift in permanent residences, and to look at the current environment for revenue and expenditures. Community engagement was conducted through the survey process to help inform some of those assumptions that were made in this update. And as noted by Hillary, Community Attributes is going to go over this, and so I'm going to pass it back to Hillary.
Thank you so much, Amy. Okay, so I mentioned before just the structure of the meeting, and I want to make sure you all kind of know how things are going to flow and when you can engage with questions and stuff. So after I'm done talking, I'm going to hand it over to our two representatives from Community Attributes, Ethan and Michaela. And they're going to talk for 20-ish, 22 minutes. And then we're going to pause and we're going to invite questions. While they're presenting, you can start posting your questions in the Q&A feature in Zoom. A lot of people are pretty experienced with Zoom thanks to the pandemic, but not everybody is. So I just want to make sure you're oriented in case you haven't used the Q&A feature before. Sam, I think my colleague has posted in the chat a little blurb about how to use the Q&A feature if you haven't. But Sam, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm a presenter mode, so I'm not seeing the same mode as you. But I think if you bring your mouse down to the bottom part of the screen, you'll see a little icon that says Q&A with a question mark. Is everyone seeing that, Sam? Is that right?
I'm seeing it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, hopefully you're seeing a Q&A feature. Can somebody give me a thumbs up if you're seeing that? I think. Okay, it should be there. You click on it, and then you have an opportunity to post a question. So we're not going to take questions during the presentation. We're going to let Ethan and Michaela present their information. Then we'll pause. I'll look at the questions that have been posted. You can continue posting them, and I'll kind of start pulling questions that, like, there's a common theme around questions or multiple, the same questions that are being asked multiple times. Then, if we have time, I'm going to pivot and take kind of virtual hands if people want to ask verbally a question. So we're going to do a little balance between questions posted in the Q&A feature and questions that people want to verbally ask or comments people want to make. So that's my hope, is that we have some time to do both of those things. But thank you for your patience and understand that there's lots of perspectives here and we want to hear from as many people as we can. So with that, I am now going to hand it over to our main presenters. You're actually hear from three folks. You're going to hear from Michaela and Ethan from Community Attributes. Michaela is a senior economist. Ethan is an economic analyst. You can see them up on the screen. You'll see them in just a second. And they conducted the study that you're going to hear about tonight. You're also going to hear from my colleague Sam Humphreys from Maul Alongi, which led the public outreach and engagement component, and he'll share a little bit about that process and what we heard. So with that, I think Michaela's going to kick it off, correct? So I'm handing it officially over to Michaela.
Thank you, Hillary, for the introduction. I think Sam is going to do the presentation. I can't see it, but I will get started. So, as Hillary mentioned, I am a senior economist with Community Attributes, and we led this study. Next slide, Sam. I'm going to provide you with a very brief introduction to this study, some of which Amy mentioned a little bit already, and then I'm going to pass it on to Sam to talk about community engagement, and then Ethan to share approach and findings before we have time for questions. Next slide. As Amy mentioned, we were commissioned by Whatcom County to update the 2008 Birch Bay Incorporation Feasibility Study. The primary aim of this study is to provide Birch Bay residents with information on the feasibility of a same cost frameworks, which asks the question, can Birch Bay feasibly incorporate while providing a similar level of service at the same existing cost to Birch Bay residents? We also looked at how different selected scenarios impact that feasibility, and provide information on capital improvements and associated costs planned for Birch Bay. Next slide, please. It's important to note that this study is not an incorporation process. The incorporation process involves a very defined set of steps that are outlined in chapters 35 and 35A of the RCW. The first step in this process is a petition initiated by registered voters of the proposed incorporation area that is submitted to the county legislative authority. To our knowledge, no petition has been filed at this time. And this study has been initiated for informational purposes only. Next slide. And just to give you a little bit of contextual information to help understand some of the subsequent information that we'll share, our study area aligns with the Birch Bay urban growth area, which you can see broadly on this map. And in 2024, the Birch Bay UGA had 8,973 residents, 5,410 housing units, and 628 jobs. And I will let Sam talk to you about engagement now.
All right. Thank you. I'm just going to make sure that I spotlight myself so I'm not hidden. There we go. Hello, everyone. I'm Sam Humphreys, and I work for Maul Alongi with Hillary, and we were contracted to support in the community engagement portion of this project. So through that engagement, we had two primary goals. The first of which was to spread the word that the study was taking place, to inform folks what the study is and how it fits into the broader conversation about the future of Birch Bay. As a reminder, the purpose of this study is to examine the financial feasibility of the potential of incorporation of Birch Bay. And our second goal was to gauge how people feel about the public services that they currently receive, which in turn helped inform the potential models used in the study. So we achieved these goals through the following outreach activities. First, we presented to community groups to gather feedback on our outreach strategy and study methodology. And then the primary means through which we achieved that second goal, gauging resident level of service satisfaction, we used a public survey open from August to September of this year. We promoted the survey through avenues listed on the slide, including the county's webpage, social media channels, and listservs. We placed some flyers at key locations in Birch Bay and amplified our outreach through existing community group networks. So what came out of the survey? We recorded an impressively high response rate of about 694, well, exactly 694 responses, which is about 8% of the population of Birch Bay. And just want to say a quick thank you to all those on this call who participated in the survey. Of those respondents, about 93% were Birch Bay homeowners, and over 96% had lived in Birch Bay for at least 1 year, with 54% of all respondents having lived in Birch Bay for over a decade. And I just want to note that we removed responses in the survey that were from non-residents. So all the responses included in the survey were from Birch Bay residents. So a few key takeaways gleaned from the survey. First and foremost, a high proportion of respondents reported that they were either satisfied or very satisfied with existing levels of service, of public services. And among those highest ranking services were water utility and waste management, followed by sewer management. So here's the overall picture of satisfaction with existing public services, ordered from the highest number of satisfied responses at the top to the lowest number of satisfied responses at the bottom. So that blue bar represents the number of satisfied responses, the percent of satisfied responses. Purple represents neutral, and then yellow represents the number of responses that expressed dissatisfaction with associated public service. So one thing that we can see when looking at this diagram is, based on the results of the survey, that there is a high level of satisfaction among almost all the public services, considering that nearly all of them recorded over 60% satisfaction. As a follow-up to that question, we wanted to understand what services folks most wanted to see improved in the future. So unsurprisingly, the 3 services that were highest priority for improvement were also the ones that received the lowest number of satisfied responses from the previous slide. And those were planning and community development, road maintenance and transportation infrastructure, and public safety. Those were ranked as the highest priority for improvement. So that's all for community engagement. I'm going to pass it over to Ethan to discuss the approach for the feasibility study. And just as a reminder, the purpose of this survey, not the study, but the survey, was to inform the design of the feasibility study. Ethan, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. For those that don't know me, my name is Ethan Schmidt. As mentioned earlier, I'm an analyst for community attributes, and thank you all for joining. Like Sam mentioned, we use the survey to help guide assumptions in the analysis and help guide the additional information included in the report regarding the higher priorities communicated by the community through that survey. And now I'm going to talk a bit more about the analysis and our findings. The analysis used a land-based fiscal model aligning with the 2008 study. As a result, population, housing, and employment are the primary drivers for the demand for services or expenditures, and to a lesser extent, revenue capacity. I say a lesser extent due to the large reliance an incorporated Birch Bay would have on property taxes, which are most heavily impacted by property appreciation and more so the Washington 1% levy limit. Growth assumptions used in the analysis align with the Whatcom County Council's 2023 through 2045 growth allocations for the Birch Bay UGA, which were adopted in 2025. Next slide, please. So as was mentioned earlier, our analysis is centered around a same cost framework. or in other words, can Birch Bay feasibly incorporate while providing a similar level of service at the existing cost to Birch Bay residents? As is common to small cities, the analysis assumes a large number of services would be contracted. These services include police, water and sewer, stormwater, and roads and transportation. Services such as sewer and stormwater and roads are typically operated under special revenue funds, which have unique and restricted revenue streams that would not apply to a city that chooses to contract these services. For this reason, the analysis focuses on the general fund, which captures general government operations and services and is a strong indicator of the financial feasibility of incorporation. Next slide, please. Wherever possible, the analysis used direct data. For example, we received labor cost data provided by the sheriff. We received assessed value data from the Whatcom County assessor and parks and maintenance fees from the county as well. As a part of this study, we interviewed or sent out a data request to multiple current service providers or districts currently serving Birch Bay. This included receiving data from the Whatcom County assessor, the Human Resources Department at the county sheriff, in addition to the Washington State Department of Revenue, the Washington State Gambling Commission, in addition to a range of other public sources. We also met with the Whatcom County Parks and Recreation District, the Birch Bay Water and Sewer District, the Birch Bay Watershed and Aquatic Resource Management District, or BV-WARM, and the Blaine Birch Bay Parks and Recreation District 2 to discuss existing services and how incorporation would impact current services. These conversations also helped us understand which service providers would be interested and capable of providing contracted services for the entirety of Birch Bay, and to help inform the costs required to provide their current levels of service. We also met with the city of Blaine to help gain a better understanding of what a city faces given the unique conditions of a small waterfront community within the same labor market. When direct data was not available, we relied on averages for small Whatcom County and Skagit County jurisdictions, in addition to the city of Blaine's budget data, depending on the area of the analysis. Next slide, please. So the core of the report, for those that haven't seen it yet, presents an in-depth discussion of revenue and expenditure methodology and data sources, the feasibility findings under the same cost framework, in addition to feasibility findings under a range of scenarios, including growth scenarios, police service level scenarios, and property tax scenarios. Additionally, the report discusses planned long-term capital improvement costs for Birch Bay and what startup cash flows may look like if Birch Bay were to choose to incorporate. Next slide, please. So under the same cost framework, the general fund revenues estimates totaled between roughly $5 million and $5.7 million, while general fund expenditures estimate totals between roughly $7 and $8 million. The gap between revenues and expenditures grows over time due to that 1% property tax levy limit I mentioned earlier, which is part of Washington state law. This law states that a taxing district is limited to increasing its property tax to 1% annually. While the analysis assumes a property appreciation of roughly 6%, again, this property tax revenues would be capped by that 1%. That's why you see that widening of the gap from 2027 to 2032. The scenario kind of captured in this chart reflects the existing tax rate of roughly 88 cents per $1,000 of assessed value charged to Birch Bay residents, and then also the existing police service level for Birch Bay, which are the two largest elements of revenue and expenditures. The police service level assumptions were informed by the average number of commissioned officers per 1,000 residents currently provided to unincorporated Whatcom County by the Whatcom County Sheriff. It should also be noted that these numbers do not include the lodging excise tax or real estate excise tax revenues, which we present in the study. These are restricted revenue sources that would be required to be kept in special revenue funds and spent on particular uses. Our estimates for lodging excise tax revenues totals roughly $350,000 to $400,000 per year, and the estimated REIT revenues to be roughly $2.5 million per year. Next slide, please. So the next few slides present revenue expenditures at a more granular level, showing some of the larger individual line items. mentioned earlier, an incorporated Birch Bay would be heavily reliant on property taxes, as seen here, where property taxes represent roughly 48% of estimated revenues. Next slide, please. Despite a relatively small commercial base, sales tax would also be a significant source of revenue for an incorporated Birch Bay. We estimate it to represent roughly 20% of total revenues. The heavy reliance on property taxes and sales tax revenues is very common for Washington cities, especially for small cities, as these are often just the two largest sources available to cities. Next slide, please. Police would be the largest single expenditure incurred by an incorporated Birch Bay. This is another common occurrence and very often seen for small Washington cities. Next slide, please. Other large expenditure line items we estimate to be other public tax, which in this case include jail, municipal court, and dispatch services, in addition to planning and community development and the city manager's office. Each of these represented roughly 10 to 12% of total expenditures. Next slide. So the table on this slide presents the general fund balances under the different growth scenarios that I mentioned earlier. It considers different scenarios in regard to population, housing, and employment growth. In general, the general fund balance was not found to be overly sensitive to growth scenarios tested for this analysis. Next slide, please. The next slides present the general fund balance estimates under the police service level and the property tax scenarios. The low police scenario aligns with the existing levels of service I mentioned earlier, which align with the average service level currently provided to unincorporated Whatcom County. The high scenario aligns with the average commissioned officers per 1,000 residents provided by Whatcom County cities. Under the current property tax rate levied in Birch Bay of roughly 88 cents per $1,000 of assessed value, the low and high police scenarios show a budget deficit. Next slide, please. If property taxes were levied to be the same rate as the 2008 rate in Birch Bay of roughly $1.39 per $1,000 of assessed value, the low police scenario sees a smaller budget deficit, totaling between $500,000 and $860,000, while the high police scenario still shows a budget deficit. Next slide, please. If an incorporated Birch Bay chose to levy the maximum property tax available to cities of $1.60 per $1,000 of assessed value, the low police scenario suggests a roughly balanced budget, while the high scenario still shows a budget deficit. And these slides show a bit of the self-determination of a city and the priorities it identifies. We were only able to test a limited number of scenarios and chose not to test scenarios with a lower level of service for priority areas identified by the community in the survey. There are many possibilities regarding the future of a community, given the manipulation of key levers such as property taxes and police service levels. Next slide, please. Now I'd like to touch a bit more on property taxes and how incorporation could impact the overall property tax rate of Birch Bay residents. So the rates that I just spoke to in the last few slides represent the property tax rate specific to an incorporated Birch Bay, which currently is represented by the county roads tax levied by Whatcom County. If Birch Bay were to incorporate, that county roads tax of roughly 88 cents per $1,000 assessed value would be replaced by a city rate that Birch Bay would be able to levy. Currently, that county roads tax represents about 13% of a Birch Bay residents' total property tax rate, while the remaining property tax rates, which include state school, local school, rural library, flood districts, things of that nature, total about 87% or $6.06. Next slide, please. For illustrative purposes, this slide shows how the property tax would be impacted by the hypothetical city of Birch Bay levying the maximum rate available to Washington cities, that $1.60 that I mentioned earlier. The city portion of property taxes would increase to about 20% of total taxes, while that $6.06 represented by all other levies would remain unchanged and would represent roughly 79% of total taxes. Next slide, please. So in total, this would represent roughly a 72-cent increase in property taxes, or increasing the total rate by roughly 10%. So the rate would go from kind of $6.9 per $1,000 of assessed value to about $7.66 per $1,000 of assessed value. Next slide, please. Before we wrap up the presentation, I'd like to talk a bit about the capital improvements analysis conducted for the study. The capital improvements analysis focused on roads and parks, as capital improvements for services such as sewer and stormwater would remain the responsibility of the self-funded districts currently providing those services. Through this analysis, which reviewed a number of Whatcom County's existing capital facilities and other long-range planning documents, it was found that there are roughly $35.4 million in road-related projects planned for the Birch Bay UGA, and nearly $2 million in parks projects planned for Birch Bay. Again, these are projects planned for Birch Bay and would not be cost incurred all in 1 year. To help fund these capital needs, cities have many options available to them, and Birch Bay would have these same options. One major funding source for capital projects is the real estate excise tax, or REIT revenues, which I mentioned earlier. These are taxes collected on the sale of real estate within a taxing district, in this case, the city of Birch Bay. And our analysis estimates that REIT revenues would total roughly $2.5 million per year. It should be noted that the source is directly impacted by the number of properties sold and the price at which those properties are sold, so revenues can be a bit volatile in poor market conditions. In addition to REIT revenues, cities have grant funding available to them for funding capital projects at the federal, state, and local level. It's an important funding mechanism for cities, but we did not model these grant funding revenues for the study given the uncertain nature of winning grants. In addition to, a newly incorporated city would likely have limited capacity to submit proposals for grants in the first few years following incorporation. Next slide, please. So yeah, the final summary of findings. Throughout the study we found, or through the survey, we found Birch Bay residents are generally happy with the current services provided to the community. Under the same cost framework, which assumes an incorporated Birch Bay would be able to provide a similar level of service without increasing the cost of residents. The analysis found that incorporation was not feasible. And then, as expected, property taxes were the largest source of revenue, and police was the highest expenditure, totaling roughly half of revenues and expenditures, respectively. And that's all we have for the presentation. So now I'll pass it back to Hillary and we can get into questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Michaela, Sam, and Ethan for that presentation. We have questions pouring in through the Q&A. Sam, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and stop sharing the slide. Thanks. And if you could spotlight me, that would be great. Actually, no, spotlight the whole team. So, because it's not going to be me answering the questions. So just a reminder, please feel free to post questions in the Q&A, which is at the bottom of the screen, little question mark, just click on it and feel free to post a question. We're going to spend, maybe 10 to 15 minutes talking about questions that get posted there. And then I'll open it up for folks to raise a virtual hand, which we'll tell you how to do in just a second. And we'll see if anybody wants to ask a live question. But I want to start with the Q&A that has been started here, and not surprisingly, a couple questions posted in the Q&A about the policing levels that were chosen for this study. We also got some questions about it in advance of this, so it's obviously a burning question for a lot of people. And the question, just to kind of recap it for everybody here, is obviously the policing levels represents the highest expenditure for a potential city of Birch Bay. I think you said around 48%, correct, Ethan? And you had a low estimate of sheriff's deputies and a low estimate of 9 and a high estimate of 18. And the question is just, how are those numbers selected? How do they reflect current policing levels in Birch Bay? Could you help people understand the reality of a low of 9 and a high of 18 sheriff's deputies working in Birch Bay?
Yeah, I can take that one. So I mentioned we tried to inform our analysis using the existing level of service for unincorporated Whatcom County. From our understanding, the sheriff does not track specifically the number of sheriffs reporting to one area within the unincorporated Whatcom County at any one given time, but they do average roughly one deputy per $1,000 residents throughout the entirety of their service area. So currently there's 98 commissioned officers within the sheriff's department serving about 95,000 residents. So we use that average of about one deputy per 1,000 residents to come up with our assumption of 9 deputies for the roughly 9,000 residents in Birch Bay. The high scenario was informed by commissioned officer levels in Whatcom County cities, which we found to have roughly 1.75 deputies per 1,000 residents on average. Michaela, do you have anything to add on that?
I don't think so. I think that yeah, I think that I don't think I have anything to add there. Thank you, Ethan.
Okay, thank you for answering that. And I know that's a big question, so there may be follow-ups to that particular topic. So feel free to keep posting them in the chat, or sorry, in the Q&A. I'm gonna introduce another question from the Q&A, which has to do with whether or not this study took into account like unexpected costs, such as, for example, the flooding that just hit Whatcom County. Do you factor in those kinds of like emergency expenditures related to natural disasters or other kinds of disasters?
I'll start, and Ethan, you can chime in. So no, we do not take that into account, not specifically because we can't predict when those expenditures are going to happen. And that's part of the reason why we focus on the general fund is providing you that understanding of what kind of revenue sources do you have available to you on an ongoing basis, so consistent, reliable revenue sources. That's why we look at things like REIT, which are available for capital expenditures. And there are a lot of other funding sources available for cities that they're just typically restricted. So we try to look at unrestricted revenue sources to provide you with an understanding if you have the ability to be feasible under like standard operations. Um, Ethan, do you want to add anything there?
I think that covers all of it.
Okay, thanks, Michaela. Since you mentioned REIT, the real estate excise tax, did I get that right? Real estate excise tax. There's a question here about if you could repeat or re-explain the projected lodging tax revenue, and kind of an associated question, wondering if the 1.8 million in planned parks projects that you had logged under REIT, if that's the same amount that Whatcom County Lodging Tax Committee and Council just approved for the development of the Birch Bay Beach Park. I hope I got that question right. You can also see it on the screen here.
Yeah, so the lodging excise tax revenue is a restricted revenue source that can be put towards tourism promotion or investment in tourism-related facilities, things of that nature. So we estimated that to be roughly $350,000 to $400,000 per year. That would be a restricted revenue source available to a city of Birch Bay. That is representative of taxes on hotels, motels, RV sites, things of that nature. The REIT revenues would be a separate restricted revenue that would be restricted to capital facility or capital improvement investments. And that could go towards roads or parks in this case. It can go to other sources, but those would be the two most relevant to an incorporated Birch Bay. I do not remember off the top of my head what that $1.8 million in planned parks projects represents, but it is the capital improvements analysis is in the appendix of the report, and that information would be able to be found there. I'm sorry, I don't remember that off the top of my head.
And I'll just add that the REIT analysis that the lodging tax analysis that we looked at also includes short-term rentals.
Yes.
So
Thank you.
it's inclusive of your standard hotel motels, RV sites, as well as Airbnb, VRBO, those kinds of things.
Thank you both. I'm going to pivot to the next question, and it has to do with the previous study that happened in 2008. I think it was mentioned that this study is an update to the 2008 study, and it came to a different conclusion than the 2008 study. So two-part question. One, could you very briefly describe how the two studies came to what the two different conclusions are in those two studies? But related to the 2008 study, they mentioned that that study didn't move forward for some reason due to the national housing crash. Um, if a city like Birch Bay was so heavily reliant on property taxes, would any drop in housing prices directly reduce income for the city and further increase possible deficits?
Ethan, I'll start on the property tax question. You can chime in. Property tax in Washington, the way it works is that you'll set I think you'll start with a rate, and that sets the amount of tax that you can get. So the city or Whatcom County or any jurisdiction property taxing jurisdiction in Washington sets an amount of property tax that they can collect. And then for each subsequent year, without any voted change to that rate, they're subject to a 1% increase limit by Washington state law. So the next year you'll be able to charge 101% of that property tax, which is then distributed across all the assessed value within that district. So a reduction in the assessed value overall will not result in a change to your property tax amount collected. It will change the rate that people see on their property tax, but it's not going to change the total amount of tax collected. There's some nuance to that. New development, for example, new construction isn't subject to the 1% increase annual limit. So that's sort of on top of that 1% increase each year. But so something like a housing market crash, unless the legislature or the legislative authority comes in and intervenes and says, oh, we want to reduce pressure on homeowners or whatever, you're not going to see a change in the total amount of tax collected for a city based on changes in your assessed value alone. Ethan, you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that covers it all again.
Was there another aspect of that question, Hillary? I think we answered the first part about property taxes, but
Yeah, it has to do with just the difference in the conclusions of the 2008 study and this study.
yeah, I think Ethan, you can chime in
Yeah.
on this one.
Yeah, so I was looking into that as well. And from my understanding, as you can see, the property tax rate for Birch Bay has dropped quite a bit since the 2008 study. So that $1.39 per $1,000 of assessed value versus the current 88 cents. And this is in part driven by that 1% property tax limit. So Whatcom County has been charging that county roads tax since 2008. And over time, they have not been able to increase their property taxes over 1% collection. So that has kind of chipped away at that effective rate that's being charged in the community. So in 2008, Birch Bay would have had just a significantly larger amount of property taxes revenues available to them because their rate was 50 cents higher, roughly 60 cents higher. So that's a big part. As you saw, the general fund balance shrunk significantly when we tested that higher property tax rate. And then also the lodging excise tax revenues were included in the general fund in that 2008 study. And they mentioned the same thing, that it's restricted revenues, and they made the claim that since Birch Bay is a small kind of touristy community, that you could argue that any operations of the city of Birch Bay could fall under tourism promotion or things of that nature. We did not want to artificially inflate revenues and include that revenue source because it is a restricted revenue, and we didn't want to kind of suggest what could potentially be illegal to use those revenues in the general fund. So that's the two biggest levers. And if you kind of charge at a higher rate and include those lodging excise tax, all of a sudden the deficits are very similar, and we would be showing a roughly feasible general fund as well. So those are the two biggest differences that I found when I tried to compare our work.
I'm just going to jump in and say that we wanted to go with a conservative approach to the general fund, and lodging tax revenues must be accounted for in a separate fund. And so while they can be used for tourism promotion purposes and capital funding related to tourism, and that may be available to support some operations for the city, we wanted to make sure that we were providing a conservative approach to using that money rather than assuming that it could be used for all operational purposes for a city. And I also want to chime in about the question about the $1.8 million for the Birch Bay Beach Park. That is excluded from the 1.8 million that we're looking at because that funding is secured and that project is anticipated for completion in the 2027-2028 timeline. So that was not included in the 1.8 that we were looking at for parks funding. And that is in the appendix of the report as well.
Oh, great. Thank you for addressing that question, Michaela. I was thinking this might be a good opportunity to share, Michaela and Ethan, what we had talked about previously, which is that the tool or the framework that you use to plug in different scenarios and numbers is available, correct? For plugging in different numbers that people want to look at different, for example, policing levels. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I don't think it's available yet, but we will be providing Whatcom County very soon our model, which will be available to the community to look at, and you can use that to test different assumptions to see how that impacts feasibility.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's important to share because, Ethan and Michaela made certain assumptions based on their data collected and understanding and expertise, but that can be fiddled with, and so they'll be providing that, to Whatcom County at some point soon. So I think that's important. Okay, I'm going to pivot back to the questions, and then we're going to take some live questions if anybody wants to do that. There's a question for you, Sam, having to do with the public outreach. And could you just speak a little bit more about what community events you attended and sort of how you went about engaging people and notifying them about this process?
Yeah, totally. So we had identified in the proposal a few different potential community events that we could attend. And the way that the timeline ended up working out, the two that we were able to attend in person, Ethan and I, went up to the Birch Bay Community Advisory Committee meeting. I believe that was in late July or early August. And then we also attended the Birch Bay Incorporation Association community barbecue. So at the BBCAC, the Community Advisory Committee meeting, we just gave an overview about what the project was and gave a heads up that a survey would be coming out because at that time the survey was not released. And then at the BBIA barbecue, we came with a couple iPads so people could take the survey if they pleased, and they could ask questions about the survey because at the time of that barbecue, the survey was live. And so, like I mentioned in the presentation, we used the county's website, the county's social media, and the county's listserv to spread the word that the survey was live and that the study was going on. And I dropped the link to the county's webpage in the chat earlier, if you want to take a look at that. And then we also dropped some posters off at a few places, a few key locations in Birch Bay that were provided to us by community members. And we also used the BBIA generously promoted the survey through their listserv.
Thank you so much, Sam. And thanks for that question. Thanks for all these questions. These are great questions. I'm just going to take a couple more from the Q&A and then I'm going to invite live questions. There's a question about that Birch Bay has a park district. Would those costs not be a part of, I'm assuming when they say, would those costs not be part of that? I assume this question means part of the study.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
so go ahead,
you were
Ethan.
going. So we spoke to the park district in Birch Bay, and they currently manage just the one park within the Birch Bay community, and then have a service area outside of Birch Bay, including part of Blaine, obviously, as it says in the name. So they did not show any interest in taking over kind of small community parks currently managed by Whatcom County. Or anything of that nature. So we didn't assume that they would take on any additional services beyond kind of that one park they currently manage within the study area. We took that into account. Their costs would not impact the community because they are a self-funded agency that is able to levy a property tax. So the only parks cost would be related to those community parks that Whatcom County would be transferring to a city of Birch Bay, depending on what agreement the county and the city came to.
Great. Thank you for addressing those. I'm just going to comment on the final comment in here from an anonymous participant related to the public engagement. Just noting that this is the comment that attending a BBIA event to them seems like a conflict of interest. And I just want to note that Maul Foster was brought in as a neutral third-party engagement company, and BBIA is one of many very interested stakeholders in this study. And so reaching out to and communicating directly with them is part of the process of effective public engagement. So it's, you know, I'm sorry that you feel that way, but we have no stake in this outcome. It's just important that we let as many people as we could know about this study and invite as many people into the process to inform the study and hear about the outcomes now. So I just wanted to address that directly.
And I'll just
now
chime in there as well, Hillary.
Yeah, go ahead, Sam.
Like I said earlier, the survey was to gather information about level of public service, not about how people perceived the prospect of incorporation. So the whole feasibility study and the survey were approached from not a biased perspective of whether incorporation should occur or whether it shouldn't occur. It was just to gather information. So I just wanted to reinforce that.
Thanks, Sam. Well, I would love to take live questions if anybody is interested. Maybe all the questions got answered in the Q&A. Please feel free to keep posting them in the Q&A. I'll kind of keep skimming it to make sure we're getting to as many of them as we can. I think we've gotten to just about everything in there. If you do want to ask a live question, Sam's going to help me out here. There is a little react heart at the bottom of your Zoom screen. It's got a little heart and it says react. If you hover over it, left click on it, you'll see a little feature that says raise hand. You can click raise hand and a little virtual hand will come up in your screen and we will call on you. So Sam's going to help me just skim and see if anybody has a hand up and feels brave and wants to ask a live question or make a comment in this meeting tonight.
We've got one from Brian Bell.
Oh, great. Okay. Hold on, I went to, oh, Brian Bell. Okay, let's go ahead and take Brian Bell off mute. And Brian, if you could also have your video, Sam, could you get Brian's video on? And there we go, video. And I think you have to unmute yourself, Brian.
Okay, thank you for this.
There we go. Okay.
I tried a couple of times to unmute, but it was not successful. Hold on, I've got my privacy device over my camera. It's actually an anchovy cam, but never mind. The question I had was for clarification on the cost basis and the service basis for police. We touched on this earlier, and there was some comments made that, well, this was based on typical level of police coverage for cities of comparable size based on a per 1,000 per capita coverage. But my recurring concern about this is that that's not the level of coverage we're seeing today. That's not what we're paying for today. So to say that we would go from what we have now, which is, less than one full-time deputy per, per at all total, to something that was 7 or 8 or 9 or 14 or 18 deputies plus support staff, just seems, I don't understand it, and I'm looking to hear that addressed here.
Okay, well, thank you, Brian. I appreciate you bringing that up again. I know Ethan and Michaela had talked about this. I know it's a really big, probably the biggest question that we've heard so far. So I'm going to invite Ethan and Michaela to again explain the decision to have kind of a low end of 9 police officers and a high end of 16, and the perception that there's a lower level of service right now. And I know there's reasons you chose those numbers, and I just love you to kind of directly address Brian's question, because I know it just needs a little more explanation, I think.
Yeah, and thanks, Hillary. Ethan, please jump in here. I'll take a stab, and then Ethan can jump in. So we know that Whatcom County is a very large area, but we looked at, how many deputies do they currently have per capita across the entire area? And while there are, deputies may be located in certain areas, typically the first thing about that is that policing is a 24-hour service. So they make sure that they have full staffing to cover that entire area all the time, their entire service area all the time. And so we have to start with that as the basis. And then additionally, while there may, like, as I said, there may be deputies that are sort of assigned to a certain patrol area for the time, they do have all of those additional deputies that are available for service in the area. So, just because their service area is very large doesn't mean that you're not actually receiving that additional access to service through the Whatcom County Sheriff's Department. And Ethan, I think that you can jump in here too as well. We did have conversations with Whatcom County regarding the costs for contract with the sheriff, and to understand what that cost would be, and we're in developing the estimates that we put together. So I think there's sort of a minimum policing service that has to be provided by a city, and we try to, take the balance of what's currently being provided, what's the minimum that you have to provide to a city of city of the size of the Birch Bay UGA, and build in that assumption without assuming a lower level of service. Ethan, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think just to kind of speak to that number again, so nine deputies or 9 commissioned officers, and our assumptions look quite high, but it takes about 5 to 6 commissioned officers to serve an area for that 24/7 cover period that Michaela mentioned. So while the nine might look high, if you're currently kind of seeing just one deputy patrolling around Birch Bay, kind of our assumptions assume that all 9 people can't be working at the same time if they're going to be providing 24/7 coverage. So it wouldn't necessarily mean there's 9 FTEs on kind of patrol at any one time. It's going to be closer to kind of between 1 and 2. So from the data we used in our conversations with the county and the sheriff, we feel that our estimates are reflective of current levels of service. So.
Okay, thank you, Ethan and Michaela. So I think I'm just going to reflect that I'm hearing from Ethan and Michaela that they chose those numbers because they in their professional opinion, reflect current level of service in Birch Bay. So I think that's the answer. Brian, I see your hand up again, but because of the number of people on the call, I'm going to see if anybody else wants to ask a live question. I'll circle back to you if nobody does, but let me just see if anybody else on the call would like to ask a live question or any follow-up questions. I'm not seeing any hands go up. So Brian, I'll let you have the mic again, and then after you, I think I'm going to pivot to a couple questions in the Q&A that have come up, and then we'll wrap the meeting. So go ahead, Brian.
Oh, thank you very much. Just in a quick summary, regardless of statistics or norms or whatever, I would just ask this: why, if we would not expect or require a higher level of police coverage than we have today, why would the costs go up?
Thanks,
Ethan?
Brian. Ethan, Michaela, you want to take that? And then Chuck, I'll call on you.
Well, I'll just jump in and say that I'm fairly confident, Ethan, you can correct me if I'm wrong here. Whatcom County does not track costs. The sheriff's office doesn't track costs that way. So they don't actually know how much the cost is to serve Birch Bay specifically. Additionally, they have a very large support staff that supports the sheriff's service throughout Whatcom County. So Ethan, I believe that when your conversations with Whatcom County, they felt that the number that we provided was accurate to the cost to serve Birch Bay now.
Yeah, we had a conversation with the county just to kind of look at police costs and make sure that that looked accurate to them. And but yeah.
All right. Thanks, Michaela and Ethan. Chuck, you have your hand up, and then we're gonna have to wrap this meeting. Go ahead, Chuck.
Oh, hi. Thanks. Yeah, I'm kind of in the same ballpark, but I have a couple of comments too. When the sheriff actually attended one of our BIA meetings that I was at as well, and he mentioned that they budget for a per thousand area, but they also allocate. And the allocation that he mentioned for Birch Bay was one deputy for 4 hours a week. And interestingly enough, just this afternoon, I went on ChatGPT and I just typed in, what's the police service in Birch Bay, Washington? And ChatGPT came back and said one deputy for 4 hours or 40 hours a week. And I guess, that the difference between budgeting one per thousand and the allocation per community is quite a different thing. But that aside, the way it's written, the report doesn't really give me much information in terms of making a decision about incorporation because it doesn't really present scenarios. And in fact, I kind of chuckled to myself when it was said, we're going to post something and you can plug in your own numbers and do your own scenarios. Well, I mean, that's your job, it's not my job. So making the assumption that there's 9 deputies or 9 commissioned officers, that's just information. I mean, it's your job to say, well, what if the community is fine with 3, and at your $230,000 per deputy all in, that would deal with a large part of your projected deficit. So, we've got that going on, and I also kind of take issue a little bit with the last slide from your last presenter, where the conclusion was that it was not feasible. That was actually the word used, and it's not your job to say whether it's feasible or not. It's the community's job. You're presenting information, and that last slide should simply have said, here's your information, and we used one scenario, came up with that, and, you're welcome to plug in your own. So I take issue with both the amount and the type of information provided and the scope of the information. And so I guess that's my comment, and, do with it as you will. Thank you.
No, thank you, Chuck. We came into this meeting knowing that there were going to be varying opinions, and we appreciate hearing them. We really do. And I just want to thank Ethan and Michaela. They, brought their professional expertise to this. They used a, current level of service approach based on data and interviews with various people, including the sheriff's department. So that's the information in the report and the study. And the study is, I think, linked in the chat, correct, Sam? Yep.
Link
The
to the
study is
study,
available on the
the
Whatcom
web.
County
Yeah.
website. And I think we got to almost all of the questions tonight. We're at time, but there's a couple outstanding questions that I'm seeing in the Q&A. And I know that Amy is available and willing to answer questions that we weren't able to answer tonight. So Amy Keenan from Whatcom County, she can see these questions and we'll track them as well and get them answered. But Amy has also offered to put her email in the chat. Thank you, Amy. It's right there. So if you have any follow-up questions or comments, you can feel free to reach out to Amy. But I just wanted to say thank you again on behalf of the project team, on behalf of Whatcom County for taking time tonight to attend this meeting. Really wonderful questions. Really appreciated your insights and questions. I hope you felt like you have a higher level of understanding of everything that went into this study. And yeah, I hope you have a great rest of your night. Thanks, everybody.